Judge insults Jasmine Crockett in court. Minutes later, she turns the tables and gets him arrested. You won't believe what unfolded in that packed courtroom, a moment so electrifying it left the entire nation speechless. It began on an otherwise routine morning in Tampa, Florida, inside courtroom 7B of the federal courthouse. Rain tapped lightly against the windows as the audience buzzed with anticipation. Reporters adjusted their cameras, clerks shuffled papers, and a low hum of whispered conversations filled the air. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, no stranger to high-pressure battles, stepped into the chamber. Once a fierce criminal defense attorney, she had dedicated years to fighting for justice on behalf of those who couldn't afford a voice. Today, as a newly elected congresswoman, she was on a mission to expose corruption that had long festered within the system. The case at hand was a powder keg, a high-profile corruption scandal implicating a wealthy real estate developer with deep political ties, accused of siphoning taxpayer money into private ventures. The courtroom was dominated by Judge Howard Gates, a man infamous for his sharp tongue, erratic rulings, and a veiled bias that many whispered about in hushed tones. As Jasmine approached the prosecution table, the judge's eyes were fixed on her, not on her determined face, but on a detail that struck him as an affront: the modest gold cross pinned just below her collarbone. The symbol, a quiet emblem of her personal faith, was all the judge could see, and it set the tone for what was about to become an explosive confrontation. With deliberate slowness, Judge Gates thumbed through a thick file, letting silence descend over the room like a heavy curtain. Finally, his voice broke the stillness, dripping with disdain. "Miss Crockett, I trust you've brought something worthwhile, or shall we skip to the part where you waste my time with theatrics?" A few chuckles came from the defense team, but Jasmine, unyielding and composed, met his gaze squarely. "Your Honor, the evidence speaks for itself," she declared, her voice even and clear. "This case involves the systematic misuse of taxpayer money. My duty today is to present the facts accurately and unflinchingly." Judge Gates leaned back, feigning boredom. "Taxpayer money, huh? That's never been the basis for baseless accusations before, right?" He sneered. Jasmine's jaw tightened, yet her tone remained respectful but firm. "With due respect, Your Honor, charges of corruption and fraud are anything but baseless when supported by overwhelming evidence." Their eyes locked, a clash of cold calculation and unwavering resolve, while the courtroom absorbed every word. Before she could continue, Judge Gates cut her off sharply. "Miss Crockett, spare me the lectures. Let's get to the point. I don't have time to indulge in your progressive fantasies." A ripple of murmurs swept through the gallery as everyone sensed that this was more than a simple courtroom dispute. It was deeply personal. Undeterred, Jasmine picked up a thick folder and opened it slowly. "Your Honor, I'd like to direct the court's attention to Exhibit A," she announced, her fingers steady as she revealed financial records that documented clear discrepancies in the developer's project funding. These records show irregularities that can't be explained away by mere accounting errors. Judge Gates snorted dismissively. "Do you always bury people in paperwork, Miss Crockett, or is this just your way of compensating for a lack of substantial arguments?" He snapped. The room tensed further, but Jasmine remained composed. She placed the folder down gently, clasping her hands as she continued. "If you prefer to address this on a personal note, I'm willing to request a brief recess to clarify my professional stance. However, I must emphasize that my right to display my religious symbol is protected by the First Amendment, and it in no way disrupts these proceedings." The judge's eyes narrowed as he leaned forward, his tone icy. "You're trying to find fault with me for wearing that cross, claiming it upsets courtroom neutrality. On what legal precedent do you base that argument?" A heavy silence fell. Jasmine tapped the paper in front of her deliberately. "Under landmark rulings such as Tinker v. Des Moines, 1969, and West Virginia State Board of Education v. Barnett, 1943, individuals do not shed their constitutional rights when entering government institutions. My cross is a personal expression of faith protected, not prohibited. Judge Gates scoffed. You're an attorney, not a law professor. Jasmine smiled coolly. Then let me remind you, this courtroom operates under the Constitution, not under personal whims. If enforcing unwritten rules based on personal bias is the standard here, then true neutrality is a myth. The tension escalated as the trial moved forward. Witness after witness took the stand. Special Agent Daniel Briggs testified about a recent raid where a suspect, armed with a Know Your Rights pamphlet distributed by a political figure's office, had lawfully refused entry because there was no judicial warrant. His testimony reinforced that constitutional rights were not crimes. When cross-examined, Briggs admitted that the absence of a warrant was precisely why the suspect's action was legal. Next, Officer Daniel Reynolds recounted a chaotic raid, where protesters had formed a human barrier, reading aloud the same rights, causing the operation to collapse. Every time the prosecution tried to frame these incidents as acts of obstruction, the defense countered that they were exercises of legal rights. Then came the testimony of former Titan Digital Compliance Officer Sarah Levine. With trembling hands and a quiet, measured voice, she recounted how internal emails revealed discussions among senior executives about adjusting policies to avoid triggering regulatory scrutiny, even as they diverted funds for private gain. I raised concerns, but they dismissed me, she whispered, her eyes welling up slightly. Her testimony painted a vivid picture of a corporate culture that bent the rules without explicitly breaking them. A cybersecurity analyst then detailed Titan Digital's aggressive algorithm strategies, designed to favor its own products while suppressing competitors. These practices, though ethically questionable, are not unprecedented in our industry, he observed. John Vance, the defense attorney with a quiet authority that had already unsettled the judge, pressed him. If such strategies are standard, then can they be deemed illegal if disclosed in user agreements? The analyst's hesitation was telling, leaving the jury to ponder the fine line between aggressive business tactics and criminal behavior. As the trial progressed, the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted from a corporate dispute to a battleground over the very nature of legality versus ethical responsibility. Linda Pruitt, the relentless prosecutor known for her surgical precision, delivered her closing arguments with unwavering intensity. Titan Digital has exploited every loophole to the detriment of our society. Regardless of intent, if the actions harm consumers and erode trust in our institutions, they must be held accountable. But then, in a moment that would redefine the entire trial, John Vance reached into his briefcase and produced a small, sealed envelope. With deliberate calm, he handed it to the court clerk, who swiftly delivered it to Judge Gates. As the judge flipped through the documents, his stern facade crumbled into stunned disbelief. The folder contained official records verifying that the defense attorney was, in fact, the sitting vice president of the United States. A collective gasp swept the room. Reporters, jurors, and even Prosecutor Pruitt were momentarily frozen by the revelation. Judge Gates's voice trembled as he finally spoke. Vice President, you should have disclosed your identity at the outset. For procedural misconduct, I hereby fine you. With a quiet nod, the vice president replied, I accept the fine, as it is my legal right. His calm acceptance deepened the shock that rippled through the courtroom. What followed was a profound debate, a battle not just over corporate misconduct, but over the very limits of judicial authority and constitutional freedoms. Vance argued passionately that if a company or individual operates strictly within the legal framework, even if they exploit its loopholes, they should not be criminalized. Unethical behavior is a signal for reform, not a charge to be prosecuted, he stated, forcing the jury to confront the uncomfortable reality that laws often lag behind ethical standards. Hours later, after relentless cross-examinations and impassioned closing arguments, Judge Gates dismissed the jury for deliberation. The courtroom was thick with anticipation as every attendee, from legal experts to ordinary citizens, sensed that this trial had evolved into something far greater than a mere corporate dispute. It had become a referendum on the balance between power, accountability, and personal expression. When the jury returned with a verdict of not guilty on the charges of corporate misconduct and unlawful data collection. The room erupted in a mix of shock and subdued relief. Linda Pruitt maintained a composed expression, masking her inner disappointment, while John Vance offered a quiet, knowing nod, as if he had anticipated this outcome all along. Even Elon Musk, sitting silently at his table, allowed a small smile of satisfaction to play on his lips. Outside the courthouse, the fallout was immediate and explosive. Media vans swarmed the entrance, and social media exploded with hashtags like hashtag trial of truth and hashtag no more silence. News outlets clashed over headlines such as Titan Digital Cleared, a battle of ethics versus law, and Courtroom showdown. When truth speaks, even the powerful must listen. Legal analysts debated whether corporations should be punished for exploiting legal gaps or whether the law itself needed urgent reform. In the days that followed, the impact of the trial reverberated through legal circles and public discourse alike. Panel discussions on national television dissected every moment of the trial, with renowned constitutional lawyers arguing that penalizing legally permissible actions would only undermine the freedoms enshrined in our Constitution. Behind the scenes, lawmakers convened emergency ethics hearings, and a bipartisan motion, soon dubbed the Crockett Accountability Act, was proposed to review and reform how courts handle the intersection of personal expression and judicial discretion. Amid this tumult, Jasmine Crockett's steadfast defiance and John Vance's quiet brilliance became symbols of a broader movement, a call for transparency, accountability, and the courage to challenge the status quo. In a moment that resonated far beyond the courtroom, Vance addressed the gallery before departing. Today is not about punishment, it is about progress. Let this trial serve as a catalyst for reform, both in corporate regulation and in our judicial system. For Pam Bondi, the fine and the ensuing courtroom drama were more than personal victories. They were turning points that ignited public debate about the very nature of power and accountability in our society. Her small gold cross, once seen as a trivial accessory, had become a symbol of unwavering integrity and the enduring strength of personal conviction. As the courthouse doors finally closed behind the departing figures, the nation was left with profound questions. Should companies be held accountable for unethical actions that are technically legal? Is it the role of the judiciary to adapt to modern challenges, or must legislative bodies step in? And most importantly, how do we ensure that personal biases never cloud the pursuit of truth and justice? In the weeks and months that followed, discussions about the trial fueled a wave of reform. Public transparency became a rallying cry. Voters demanded that elected officials and judges alike be held accountable. Town halls, online forums, and even boardrooms buzzed with the message that true progress begins when we dare to question authority and when we stand by our principles, even in the face of overwhelming opposition. The legacy of the Titan digital trial, with its twists and revelations, would continue to shape debates on corporate accountability, judicial integrity, and the delicate balance between ethical responsibility and legal technicalities. It served as a stark reminder that in a system where loopholes can shield unethical behavior, the call for reform must be relentless, and that sometimes the quiet courage of a single individual can set the stage for profound, lasting change. Subscribe for more stories that challenge the boundaries of law, ethics, and power.